The war in Ukraine has been on for more than 110 days. One direct fallout has been the rise in oil prices. Oil is trading at more than $120 per barrel. That's bad news for all oil consumers, especially for countries like India that import around 85% of their import needs, their energy needs. India's oil bills began shooting up, so it diversified imports. Russia was selling discounted oil. India started buying more Russian oil. Over the last 3 months, those numbers have shot up. Russia is now India's second biggest oil supplier, second only to Iraq and above Saudi Arabia. This is as much a story of oil politics as of oil economics. The West wants the world to shun Russian oil, but few have heeded the call, because Western countries, especially Europe, have themselves not been able to stop buying Russian oil. On Gravitas tonight, as we break down the India numbers, we'll tell you how Europe and China remain the biggest sources of money for Russia.
If you are looking at energy purchases from Russia, our total purchases for the month would be less than what Europe does in an afternoon. That in the month of March, Europe has bought, I think, 15% more oil and gas from Russia. Buying Russian gas is not funding the war. It's only Indian money and oil coming to India which funds, but it's not gas coming to Europe which funds.
That's how India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar has spent recent months. Everywhere he went, he faced the same question. Why is India buying Russian oil? Guess the scrutiny is only going to increase in the weeks ahead because India is buying more oil from Russia than ever before. Russia has become India's second largest oil supplier. Russia has beaten Saudi Arabia to take this spot. So this is what the sellers list now looks like. Iraq remains India's biggest source of oil. Russia comes second. And Saudi Arabia is third. Before the war began, Russia accounted for 1% of India's oil imports. Now it's 18%. In 2021, India bought 12 million barrels of Russian oil. This year, that number has shot up to 60 million barrels already. Why has India increased imports? To secure its energy needs. Also to get cheaper oil. India sells, oil in fact sells for around $120 per barrel in the international markets today. That's what oil is selling for, $120 per barrel. Russia is offering the same at a steep discount, a discount of $30 to $35. So one barrel of Russian oil effectively costs around $90 instead of $120. Now, for a country that imports more than 85% of its oil, this is significant savings. So India is buying more and more Russian oil. I'm sure more Western lectures will follow. In fact, let me tell you about something that happened last week. The US threatened India. Amos Hochstein works for the US State Department. He's a top advisor on energy to the government of the US. Last week, he appeared before a panel of lawmakers. He was asked about India's purchases of Russian oil, and he had some advice for Indian officials. This is what he said. I would ask two things. One, don't go too far. Don't look like you're taking advantage of the pain that is being felt in European households and the United States. Second, make sure you negotiate well, because if you don't buy the oil, nobody else will. Don't go too far, he says. Do not take advantage. This is what the US is saying to India. Will it make the same threats to China? Will it send the same message to Europe? I ask this because Europe and China form the bulk of Russia's energy market. Europe has been Russia's ATM. In the first 100 days of the Ukraine war, Europe bankrolled Russia. Then we have China. It has poured billions into Russian coffers. Let me show you some numbers. Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February this year. In the 100 days that followed, it sold almost $100 billion worth of energy. $100 billion in 100 days. Moscow earned $48 billion from crude oil exports, $25 billion from piped gas, $13 billion from oil products, $5.3 billion from LNG, that's liquefied natural gas, and $5 billion from coal exports. So this is what Russia earned in the first 100 days of war. It was less than usual, but still significant. Now, Russia was spending close to $900 million every day on this invasion. It was earning billions in energy revenue, so war expenses have not been so tough to manage. Next question. Who was buying Russian energy? Who was buying all of this oil? The European Union, they got the lion's share. How much? 61% of all Russian exports went to Europe. 61%. Now look at this chart. These are the top 9 buyers of Russian energy. China, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Turkey, Poland, France, India and Belgium. What do you notice? 6 out of 9 countries on this list are European. How much did they pay for Russian energy? Almost $40 billion. These 6 countries paid almost $40 billion for Russian energy in 100 days. If you add the rest of Europe, it comes to $59 billion. That is what Europe paid to Russia during this war. Now compare this to Indian imports. India is the 8th largest buyer of Russian energy. It bought 18% of Russian exports. How much did India pay? Less than $4 billion. How much did Europe pay? $59 billion. That's 16 times more than Indian purchases. So the Western hypocrisy is there for you to see in numbers. Europe remains the biggest buyer of Russian energy, but it still likes to lecture the world about buying from Russia. The fact is, Europe depends on Russia for most of its energy needs. During the first 100 days of this war, the EU bought 30% of all Russian coal exports, 50% of crude oil, 75% of oil products, 75% of LNG, and 85% of all pipeline gas. Now, Russia has another big market for its energy, and that is China. China is the single largest buyer of Russian exports now. Earlier, this position was held by Germany, but after the war in Ukraine, China has replaced Germany. It is quietly ramping up its purchases. By the month of May, China was buying more than 1 million barrels of Russian oil every day. Chinese state-owned companies are making these purchases. They're also moving Russian oil exports. 3 Chinese companies are involved in this: Zenhua, Sinopec, and Livna. They send their ships to Russian ports to pick up oil. One of these companies, Zenhua, has even chartered ships. All this oil is going to China. Just like Europe, China is buying other Russian energy exports as well. There was a major spike in the month of April. Chinese imports of Russian energy increased by 75%. This includes oil, gas, and coal imports. Beijing bought more LPG from Russia as well. Imports of Russian LPG have increased by 80%. Europe has recently made a lot of noise about cutting down on Russian energy, but the data shows that none of that matters. Russia has already lined up a new buyer. China can effectively replace the Europeans. China can keep its economy afloat by buying Russian energy. But the West remains obsessed with India and Indian imports of Russian energy. The fact is, sanctions have failed to put a stop to Russian energy purchases. The West might criticize the world for buying energy, but it cannot put a stop to it. And those higher crude prices are creating not just a political crisis. Pretty soon they could push the world into recession too. And this is a story we've been focusing on this show. In America, the first domino has fallen. It is the stock market. US stocks have officially entered bear market. What does that mean? If any index falls 20%, you say it has entered bear territory. The US is already there. Let me show you the numbers. Standard & Poor was trading at around 4,800 in January. Now it's around 3,700. If you do the math, it works out to 22%. In other words, a bear market. And Standard & Poor is not alone. Nasdaq is down 32% from its peak in November last year. Dow Jones is down 17%. So the economic outlook is extremely dull. Does this mean a recession is inevitable? Let's look at past instances. Every bear market does not automatically lead to recession. There is usually a threshold for that, and that's around 35%. When stocks fall 35%, it is usually followed by a recession. So the US is somewhere in the middle. But here's the problem. The economic slide is not over yet. Chances are the stocks will drop even further. Why? Because of inflation. The US Federal Reserve will announce their next policy on Wednesday. An interest hike is a foregone conclusion. The question is by how much? How much will they hike interest by? The initial expectation was 50 basis points, but that was before Friday's inflation data. Now all bets are off. US inflation has topped 8.6%. It is the highest level in almost 40 years, which means the Federal Reserve could turn even more aggressive. There is talk of a 75 basis point hike or even 100 basis points. And if that happens, the markets will fall even more. Why is that? Because of two reasons. Number one, when interest rates rise, people have less money in their pockets. They must pay more on their credit cards or their EMIs, which leaves them with little money to invest in stocks. So stocks fall. Reason number two, lower profits for companies. Loans are the lifeline of any business. If you pay more on these loans, your profits will be less. And the end result will be this. Your shares begin to underperform. What do investors do in such situations? They pull out money from the stock markets. Instead, they look for safer investments. For ordinary people, that could mean boring instruments like a savings account or maybe a fixed deposit. Basically, anything to keep their money safe. Bigger investors will still look for returns, but less risky options. The most popular one is the US Treasury bond. The 10-year bond is almost 3.3% up, its highest level since April 2011. So institutional investors are putting their money in bonds, and the numbers support this. In April, investors pulled out $27 billion from Standard & Poor. In the same month, they pumped $6 billion into the bond market. So US stocks lost $27 billion. US bonds gained $6 billion. What explains the shift? A desire for security. During such uncertain times, every investor wants security. They want to protect their money, which means there is no appetite for risk. Take Bitcoin, for instance. It is a highly volatile form of investment, not even legal in most countries. Bitcoin is down 53% in the last 6 months. It was trading at $48,000 in December. Now it's worth $21,000. When Bitcoin falls, the entire crypto market collapses. Guess how much money has been wiped out? Roughly $2 trillion. $2 trillion. That's how much crypto investors have lost in the last 6 months. $2 trillion. These factors do not just impact the US, they have been globalized. India too is dealing with the same challenges. Wholesale inflation is up 13.9% in India. It's the highest level in almost 3 decades. So just like the US Fed, India's RBI too will have to hike interest rates. The first hike was 40 basis points. The second was 50 basis points. How big will the third hike be? That is what Indian investors are looking at. And these are predictable factors. Inflation, interest rates, all of these things are factored in by the markets. But here's what you cannot factor in. Random supply chain disruptions. The war in Ukraine is one example. Another is the truckers' protest in South Korea. It's happening as we speak. More than 6,800 truckers have struck work across 14 sites. What do they want? They want to extend pandemic relief measures. South Korea's government wants to remove the minimum wage scheme. The truckers want to keep it. So far, their strike has affected trade worth $1.2 billion, but the impact is localized. Only South Korea's economy has been affected so far. But that could change if the strike drags on. South Korea is a leading producer of semiconductors and automobiles. Both sectors need trucks for transportation. So the strike in South Korea could soon add to your economic pain through more expensive gadgets or longer waiting period for cars. And all of this really boils down to our globalized economy. Every country is linked to another today. If the US enters bear market, India's Nifty also falls. If the US Fed hikes interest rates, the Indian rupee slides. That is the downside of the globalized economy. We'll be watching this story very closely for you. For the moment, we'll turn to the war in Ukraine, the one that's pushing our world towards a recession. Russia is intensifying its operations in Ukraine. The Russian forces have set their sights on eastern Ukraine. They want to strengthen their grip on separatist-dominated areas. Ukrainian forces are losing ground in Severodonetsk. They're demanding more weapons from the West. They want these weapons to respond to Russia's offensive. How soon will they get help? Here's a report.
A fierce battle is underway. Every bridge leading to Severodonetsk have been destroyed. The eastern city has been suffering for weeks now. Russian forces have intensified their operations here. Their goal is to take the city. Pro-Russian fighters are sending a message to the Ukrainian forces. Surrender or die.
Severodonetsk has practically been blocked after they blew up the last bridge yesterday which connected it to Lysychansk. Those Ukrainian divisions that are there forever. They have two options, either to follow the example of their fellow servicemen and surrender or to die. There is no other option.
The battle for Severodonetsk will define the future of Russia's invasion. The city lies in the heart of Donbas, where the war between Ukraine and Russia has raged for 8 years now. Russia is also targeting Lysychansk nearby. If Russian forces take control of both cities, Moscow will effectively control the entire Luhansk. Pro-Russian separatists already control most of this region. The odds are against the Ukrainian forces. But the president of Ukraine has refused to pull back his troops. Volodymyr Zelensky says there is no choice but to move forward.
In the battles in Donbas, and they will surely go down in military history as one of the most brutal battles in Europe and for Europe, Ukrainian army and our intelligence tactically still beat the Russian military. We are dealing with the absolute evil, and we have no other choice but to move forward, free our entire country, kick the occupiers out of all our regions. And although now the width of our front is already more than 2,500 kilometers, you can feel the strategic initiative is still on our side.
Zelensky needs more and better weapons to win this war. The Ukrainian forces are unable to match Russian firepower. On the battleground, Russian forces are firing as many as 50,000 rounds a day. Severodonetsk is also being attacked with mortar shells, air bombardment and missile strikes. The West has committed to sending more weapons to Ukraine. The new supplies are supposed to include long-range weapons like multiple launch rocket systems. But there is a delay in delivery. Yesterday, Ukrainian officials said the weapons are not arriving as quickly as they should. A senior advisor to President Zelensky sent out this tweet. It had a list of weapons Ukraine needs. Kyiv wants more howitzers, rocket systems, tanks, armored vehicles and drones. Ukrainian forces are losing ground due to the delays. They have been pushed back from the city center of Severodonetsk. Russian forces are believed to be gathering more equipment. They want to encircle Severodonetsk and mount a final offensive. Without any real firepower, Ukrainian soldiers and civilians inside this city are trapped. They are at the mercy of Russian forces. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
India is home to the world's largest youth population. Nearly 40% of Indians are aged 13 to 35. It's a country of 1.4 billion people, and a lot of these people value stability over competitive salaries. That's been the trend. They want a job that promises stability, retirement benefits and pensions. Jobs in the Indian armed forces tick most of these boxes. Plus, they bring respect and a sense of status. So youth, especially those from rural areas, want to join the forces. Today, the Government of India has announced a new recruitment scheme. It aims to transform the Indian Defence Forces. How? By ducking the burden of pensions.
अग्निपथ योजना के अंतर्गत यह प्रयास किया जा रहा है कि इंडियन आर्म्ड फोर्सेस का प्रोफाइल पूरी तरह से यूथफुल हो। यूथफुल प्रोफाइल से यह फायदा भी होगा कि उन्हें नई नई टेक्नोलॉजी के लिए आसानी से ट्रेन किया जा सकेगा और उनकी हेल्थ और फिटनेस का लेवल भी काफी बेहतर होगा।
This plan is being called Agnipath. You may have seen it on social media. It's been trending all day today. Agnipath translates to the path of fire. Agni meaning fire and Path is path. Under this scheme, 45,000 youngsters will be inducted into the armed forces every year. They will serve for a period of 4 years. These recruits will be called Agniveers. They will undergo a 6-month training. They'll be paid around 40,000 rupees, that's $512 a month. They will also get allowances like medical and insurance cover. And after 4 years of service, only 25% of these recruits will be retained. The rest will have to exit the services. They will not receive a pension. They will get an exit package of around 12 lakh Indian rupees. That's close to $15,300. This scheme will be used to recruit soldiers or jawans and not officers. Will it help the Indian forces in the long run, though? Well, it has its benefits. It also has its drawbacks/challenges. Let's start with the most obvious benefit, cost cutting. This scheme will reduce the burden of pensions. You see, India has the world's second largest standing defense force. There are some 1.4 million personnel on active duty. All of these people retire with a pension. As of 2020, India had more than 32 lakh or 3.2 million defense pensioners. Every year, this number goes up by 55,000. India's defense budget is 5.2 lakh crore rupees, and pension alone accounts for 1.19 lakh crores. It's a big chunk of the budget. There's a whole list of pensions: service pension, family pension, special family pension, liberalized family pension, disability pension, war injury pension, invalid pension, reservist pension. Experts say these expenses are keeping the armed forces from spending on equipment. They say Agnipath, this new scheme, will solve the problem. It will help divert money from pension to equipment. Benefit number 2, the scheme gives India's youth a chance to serve in the armed forces without necessarily devoting their entire lives to the forces. 3, it will help fill vacancies. The armed forces currently need 200,000 people. That's 2 lakh people, 2 lakh vacancies. The government says the first batch of Agniveers will be ready by mid-2023. Sounds like a good plan. But will it work? Will young Indians apply for it? The scheme targets Indians aged 17.5 to 21 years. That's when they're fresh out of school or college. Will they take up a job that they'll have to give up after 4 years? Like I said, a lot of Indians join the forces because of job security. Of course, there's patriotism too. But that does not pay for bills upon retirement. So what will they do after 4 years of service? The government says, and I'm quoting, post this stint of 4 years, the Agniveers will be infused into the civil society where they can contribute immensely towards the nation-building process. The skills gained by each Agniveer will be recognized in a certificate to form part of his unique resume. So there's promise of a certificate, but not very much about its applicability. Where will they use it? Will India Inc., for instance, give preference to Agniveers when they hire people? So attractiveness of this scheme may be a problem. It's still early days. Performance could be another. Ask any defense expert and they'll tell you that camaraderie is central to combat, and that 3.5 years won't be enough for recruits to bond with their units, to build a sense of camaraderie, leave alone resonate with the battle cry. The next challenge is training. Experts say it takes 2 to 3 years to suitably train a Jawan. Agnipath will crunch that training to 6 months. Will that be adequate? Defense analysts point at Ukraine. They say Russian conscripts have performed disastrously in this war. Well, India cannot afford this, given the threats from Pakistan and China. Some officers have also flagged that Agnipath may become an adventure camp for people looking for some thrill or temporary employment. So does this policy budget in all these factors? Or is this a myopic plan, focusing only on cutting down pension costs? We do hope these questions have been deliberated upon, because India faces multiple security challenges, especially from its eastern neighbor, China. Tensions on the border are rising again. China is expanding its military infrastructure, and now Xi Jinping is expanding the powers of his military. China's president has signed new orders. Chinese mouthpieces are talking about them. Xi signs outlines that direct China's military operations other than war. That is the headline of the Global Times. Chinese military operations other than war. That's what they're talking about. Xi Jinping has set out the rules for such operations, and the world has reason to worry. Reports say the Chinese president has signed as many as 59 articles. Xi Jinping is effectively legalizing the PLA's foreign military operations of the Chinese army. What will be the nature of these operations? The Global Times has offered some clues. Allow me to quote from their story. This is what the Global Times has said. Chinese troops can prevent spillover effects of regional instabilities from affecting China, secure vital transport routes for strategic materials like oil, or safeguard China's overseas investments, projects and personnel. That is the official line from Beijing. Now let me tell you what the statement really means. It justifies any Chinese military mission abroad. So if there are Chinese citizens abroad, and if China feels that they're under threat, then they can send troops to another country. If Beijing feels Chinese infrastructure is at risk, the PLA can be deployed. China can now justify deploying troops abroad to even guard oil. Now, this might not sound like a big deal. Any country with a large presence abroad, like China, would like to protect its interests, and why not? The Chinese press makes it sound like a harmless proposal. They call it non-war military operations. But you see, euphemisms do not change facts. Look at Russia. They still don't call it a war. What they're doing in Ukraine is still, according to them, a special military operation. That's what Vladimir Putin calls it, not a war, a military operation. Xi Jinping is trying the same trick. Experts believe China could be borrowing the same terminology. You see, Chinese and Russian forces are masters of such tactics. Experts call it grey zone warfare. Now, what is grey zone warfare? It's actions and tactics that fall short of a conventional war but hurt the enemy nonetheless. The objective is to subdue the opponent through a number of small victories over a period of time. And usually this is accomplished through small military operations, the ones that use limited military resources. China has practiced all of this in Taiwan. The PLA regularly conducts incursions and missions. Chinese planes, in fact, violate Taiwan's air defense zone all the time. They do the same with India. Chinese military activities near the border with India fit the definition of grey zone warfare. Beijing amassed troops near the border in Ladakh without any provocation in 2020. Soldiers of the PLA attacked Indian troops without warning. 2 years later, the Chinese are ramping up their military infrastructure in the same area. Xi Jinping, in fact, is keeping a close eye on the border with India. Recently, the Chinese president traveled to Chengdu. This city, Chengdu, is the headquarters of the PLA's Western Theatre Command. They look after the border with India. Chengdu is an important city for the PLA. It serves as a launch pad for their activities in Tibet and Xinjiang. What was Xi Jinping doing there? Reports say he met with the top brass of the Western Theatre Command. Xi Jinping also wants to keep the generals in check. He recently tweaked a few rules. Low-ranked officers have been given more powers. They have been empowered to supervise the senior brass. Reports say the move is aimed at securing the military's loyalty to Xi Jinping, powers to conduct foreign operations, and expanding military infrastructure, and the demands to pledge loyalty. Xi Jinping basically wants his military to take on a bigger responsibility to achieve his mission of global dominance. And this only escalates the threat of conflict. Now, the UK's top court has refused to stop the Boris Johnson government from dumping migrants into Rwanda. The first flight to Rwanda has been cleared for takeoff. We told you about why this decision is wrong, how it is against the right to seek asylum, or against human rights for that matter. Today, we'll tell you that this decision is worse because it involves shipping these migrants not to just any other country in the world, but to Rwanda. The East African nation has problems of its own, and far too many problems. Rwanda has gone from one conflict to another, and as we speak, it is fighting Congo. So what exactly was the Boris Johnson government thinking?
This is the Boscombe Royal Air Force Base in the United Kingdom. The flight you see has been cleared for takeoff. The plane will soon be heading to the land of a conflict. Rwanda, or the Republic of Rwanda. It's a country landlocked between Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, and Tanzania. For the longest time in history, Rwanda was obscure. When it finally made headlines in 1994, it was because of a genocide. 10% of the country's population was killed in 100 days. The prosecuted were mostly the Tutsis. They used to be the ruling class, the ones that owned cattle and land. Colonial Belgium had pitted a clan called Hutu against the Tutsi. Bloody battles between the two began in the mid-90s. It then amplified into a genocide. The world had not seen anything like this, be it in scope or intensity. 1 million people were killed in 10 days. People hacked to death by garden tools. Many were killed by their own neighbors. They say the Hutus wanted to exterminate the Tutsi, and they nearly achieved their goal. When the genocide ended, Rwanda's military entered neighboring Zaire, or present-day Democratic Republic of Congo. The military wanted to expel Hutu extremists, but it found itself involved in Zaire's civil war. World bodies criticized Rwanda, even suspended foreign aid. A peace agreement was reached in 2002. Rwanda withdrew troops from Congo. Congo repatriated Hutu extremists. In 2003, Rwanda held its first multi-party democratic election. That franchise did not stop ethnic violence. In 2010, when Rwanda was holding its second multi-party presidential elections, many opposition candidates and journalists were murdered. Many independent media outlets were banned. President Paul Kagame currently sits at the helm of Rwanda. His opponents abroad have been shot or strangled to death. Some 38% of the country lives below the poverty line. There's repression, there's brutality. Rwanda is currently being accused of helping rebels in Democratic Republic of Congo who've successfully occupied a town. Congo says Rwanda has once again invaded their country. This is a story that goes from one conflict to another. And despite all this, the United Kingdom thinks Rwanda is a perfect place for a fresh start. It is shipping illegal immigrants to Rwanda for a better life. Seriously, what gives?
Here's an odd question. How many of you have watched a full match of golf? Chances are very few. If you do not understand the game, golf can seem slow and boring. But not this week. This week, golf is the most happening sport on television. Just one problem. All the action is happening away from the golf course, in a Gulf kingdom. Saudi Arabia has announced a new golf league. It's called LIV Golf. The league is completely funded by the Saudi Sovereign Fund. Total investments, around $2 billion. Riyadh is taking a wild and expensive swing at golf. But will they succeed? The PGA is working hard to ensure they do not. Some basic facts first. The PGA stands for Professional Golfers Association. They run the show in golf. All the big tournaments, all the rankings, everything is handled by the PGA. Everything except the players. You see, professional golfers are not contracted to PGA. They're independent. They pay money to enter each PGA tournament, which means they can pick where to play, PGA or LIV Golf. A few big names have picked the Saudi League, like Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson and Patrick Reed. All of them have been kicked off the PGA Tour. They can only play LIV Golf from now on. But why are these players picking Saudi Arabia? After all, PGA has all the rich history, all the big tournaments. So why would golf players not choose the PGA? Well, because of money. Saudi Arabia's league is offering $255 million in prize money. What about the PGA? Their biggest event offered $15 million last year. From a purely financial perspective, it's a no-brainer. $225 million versus $15 million. And that's why Saudi Arabia chose golf. It's losing viewership, it's losing revenue. So it was the perfect sport to gobble up. Their slogan sums it up: golf but louder. That's what they're calling it. Saudi Arabia is using this league to drown their political toxicity. It's called sports washing. Using sports to hide your political drawbacks. That's what sports washing is. And Saudi Arabia has many drawbacks. They don't have an elected government. They don't have women's rights. They do not tolerate dissent. Nothing that can be used as a soft power tool. Enter sports. Saudi Arabia is using their money to buy goodwill through sports. I can give you examples. Saudi Arabia owns Newcastle United, a football club in England's Premier League. They also host the Saudi Cup, easily the most profitable horse racing event in the world. They also have a contract with WWE Wrestling. Every year, WWE stages a special event in the kingdom. They call it Crown Jewel. The first edition was held days after Jamal Khashoggi's murder. These events drown out other headlines from Saudi Arabia. The crackdowns, the arrests, the executions, all of it gets buried under sport. And that's what LIV Golf is said to be all about. Families of the 9/11 victims have urged golfers to not take up the offer. Some of the big names have not, like Tiger Woods. Rumor is he was offered a 9-figure package that's almost $1 billion. Whatever the reason, he declined it. But how long can pro golfers resist this? The same thing happened in England's Premier League. Fans and government officials initially resisted the Saudi offer, but eventually they gave in because petrodollars trumped principles. What if something similar happens with golf? Imagine LIV Golf takes off in the next couple of years. The viewership improves, the revenue increases. Will top golfers still stay away, or will they try to earn their slice of the pie? That's what the PGA is worried about. They may talk about principles, but they too are worried about the money, about splitting revenue with a rival league. If this experiment succeeds, it would set a precedent. Other sports could be gobbled up. More rival sporting leagues could emerge. Is there any way to stop this sports washing? A lot depends on athletes. If they refuse to engage with oppressive regimes, nobody can force them to. That's one way. Another is for sporting bodies to take the lead. They can reject funding from countries like Saudi Arabia or China or Qatar. But don't hold your breath, because global sports is built around money. These golfers chase that money all the way to Saudi Arabia, and something tells me they won't be the last. And now we have a question. How can we live longer? A fuller life? It's a question that has bothered mankind forever. What is the secret? A good diet or some green juice, a lot of exercise, positive affirmations, maybe some meditation? The world has tried everything. But a new study has asked an all-important question. Do optimists live longer? The answer, according to the study, is yes. Is there a link between longevity and having a better outlook to life? The answer again is yes. But that's not the question that's got everyone talking. How does one stay optimistic in these troubled times? That is the question the world is discussing. Let's explore.
The power of manifestation. The benefits of a healthy diet. A green juice which can cleanse your gut. A superfood which can help you be a superhuman. A new workout to give your joints some much needed TLC. Thousands of supplements and so-called anti-aging creams to give you radiant skin. A 9-step skincare routine advertised by a certain reality TV star to keep you glowing effortlessly. And some H2O to keep you hydrated. We're not done. 10K steps a day to keep your heart healthy. All these steps and missteps are designed and marketed to give you a longer life. Well, today, scratch all this because there may be a shortcut. Science says just have a better outlook to life. A new report has found something that common sense and our ancestors have been telling us for ages, that being optimistic can actually add years to your life. This is truly the stuff of Hallmark cards, but there's evidence to prove it. The study was published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society It found a correlation between lifespan and optimism. Interestingly, all subjects were women from diverse backgrounds. The study discovered that optimistic women had a longer lifespan, many living past the age of 90. Why only women for the study? Go figure. The author of the study says, and I quote, "Although optimism itself may be affected by social structural factors such as race and ethnicity, our research suggests that the benefits of optimism may hold across diverse groups." This isn't the first study of its kind. A longer lifespan has often been linked to a more positive outlook to life. In 2019, a study found both men and women with the highest levels of optimism, having an average of 11% to 15% of a longer lifespan in comparison to those who were not so positive. All this research seems to suggest that being more optimistic has more power to influence our lifespan than our socioeconomic status or underlying health conditions, our mental health issues, even poor habits. So what's the secret to happiness and living longer in front of us all this time? Just being optimistic? Easier said than done. We live in a world where social media influences each and every decision. Our moods, our expectations, even our ambition. There is a war raging in Europe. The pandemic has upended our lives. Inflation and rising costs of living make us weigh our daily choices. Peer pressure, the rat race, hustle culture. All these factors influence our moods, our behavior, our outlook to life. So while being optimistic may be the key to a longer life, where is the key to unlock optimism? Experts also warn against toxic positivity, which stems from the idea that the ideal way to cope with a bad situation is to put a positive spin on it. Well, this isn't going to work for most of us. Simply put, you can't shove ice cream into someone's face if they don't want it. So how does one become more optimistic? Experts say you can try something known as the best possible self method. That's one of them, where you imagine a more fulfilled future for yourself, free of problems, grievances, all goals achieved. You can also pen down positive thoughts and experiences. This can train your brain to look at the brighter side. While being optimistic may be the key to happiness, we don't need a study to tell us that, do we? What we need, however, are positive experiences which enable us to be more optimistic. Well, if only a study could tell us a recipe for sunny side up always. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And now let's take a look at what else is making news across the world. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
Burkina Faso began 3 days of mourning after 79 people died in one of the bloodiest massacres in a nearly 7-year-old insurgency by suspected terrorists. Israel Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has warned that his fragile coalition faces a complete collapse after reports that a lawmaker from his right-wing party said he was no longer part of the government. The European Union has threatened legal action against Britain after the UK government on Monday introduced a legislation proposing a unilateral overhaul to the post-Brexit trade deal with Northern Ireland. Indigenous protesters in Ecuador blocked roads to demand a fuel price cut amid rising inflation, unemployment and poverty in the country. In at least 10 of Ecuador's 24 provinces, roads were blocked with burning tires and barricades. Access to the capital was partly cut off. In the south of Mexico, migrants protested outside an immigration station, demanding safe passage that will allow them to move through the country and continue their journey to the United States. A sandstorm swept through parts of Iraq. Police officers were seen controlling traffic as visibility was reduced in Baghdad city. Airports, including that of Baghdad and Najaf, were temporarily closed. America's iconic Yellowstone National Park closed for the first time in 34 years after record floods triggered by heavy rain and a glacier melt destroyed roads and bridges. The world's biggest boy band, BTS, have announced they are going on a hiatus to focus on their solo careers. The 7 K-pop stars also bid a tearful farewell to their fans, called The Army, at a dinner that was streamed live. The media streaming rights for the cash-rich Indian Premier League have been sold for a combined fee of $6.2 billion. Disney's Star has retained the television rights for the Indian subcontinent for the 2023-27 cycle in a deal worth $3.2 billion, while the digital rights have gone to Reliance's Viacom 18 for $3.05 billion. Holders France have been knocked out of the UEFA Nations League after a 1-0 defeat to Croatia. Luka Modric scored the only goal of the game in the 5th minute. France are bottom of their group with just 2 points from 4 games, which means they cannot reach next year's finals.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.